In 2004, a wildlife veterinarian named Douwe Grobler was working in a game reserve in South Africa when his team sedated a young elephant bull, removed a snare that had been cutting into his leg for what the wound suggested was several weeks, treated the infection, and released him. The elephant was unconscious for the procedure. He came out of sedation surrounded by humans in close proximity, which should have produced immediate flight behavior. He stood. He looked at the team. He stayed in that position longer than made any behavioral sense for a wild elephant encountering humans at close range. Then he walked away. 11 months later, at a different location in the same reserve, the same elephant approached Grobler's vehicle specifically, not the vehicle next to it, not a different researcher's vehicle. The same man identified from a group at a distance 11 months after a single encounter while the elephant was sedated and in pain. He stood beside the vehicle for several minutes, then left. Whether that constitutes gratitude in any sense humans would recognize is a question worth being careful about. But something was happening. Something that the straightforward animals don't have the cognitive architecture for this dismissal doesn't adequately cover. And it keeps happening. Across species, across contexts, across enough documented cases that wildlife researchers have quietly stopped treating it as anomalous and started asking what mechanism explains it. Start with what the brain needs to do for this to be possible at all. Recognizing a specific individual human, out of the thousands of humans an animal might encounter across months or years in different locations and different contexts, requires several things operating simultaneously. It requires encoding a specific experience as significant enough to store long-term. It requires attaching identifying information to that stored experience. What this specific human looked like, smelled like, sounded like. And it requires retrieval of that stored experience when the identifying information reappears, even partially, even in a different context. This is not simple memory. This is episodic memory. The capacity to store and retrieve specific experiences with their emotional and contextual content intact. For decades, episodic memory was considered exclusively human. The argument was that non-human animals lived in an eternal present, capable of learned associations but not of genuine recollection of specific past events. That position has been systematically dismantled over the last 20 years. Nicola Clayton at the University of Cambridge spent years studying western scrub jays, small corvid birds with brains roughly the size of a walnut, and found that they demonstrate what she called episodic-like memory. The ability to recall what specific food they cached, where they cached it, and when, adjusting their retrieval behavior based on how long ago the caching occurred and whether the food would have degraded in that time. They weren't just remembering locations, they were remembering events with temporal context and reasoning about those events to make current decisions. If a scrub jay can do this, the argument that large-brained mammals with complex social structures cannot is difficult to maintain. And if animals can store specific experiences with emotional content, which the scrub jay research strongly implies, then the question of whether a rescued animal remembers its rescue becomes not, is this possible, but what specifically does the animal remember, and how does that memory affect its behavior? Here's where it gets more interesting. The moment of rescue, from the animal's neurological perspective, is an extraordinarily salient experience. Pain, physical restraint, chemical intervention, if sedation is involved, the proximity of humans at a range that under any other circumstance would trigger maximum threat response. All of this produces a massive neurological event. Stress hormones spike to levels that in normal circumstances would accompany a predator attack. The brain, under that kind of arousal, encodes the experience with exceptional clarity and durability. And then the pain stops. The restraint ends. The animal is released into a state of reduced pain or no pain, in proximity to the specific humans who produced that transition. Neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp spent decades mapping what he called the primary emotional systems in mammalian brains. Systems so ancient and so conserved across species that he argued they were homologous, not merely analogous, across mammals. His care system, associated with nurturing and social bonding, and his grief system, associated with social loss, showed activity patterns in non-human mammals that were structurally identical to human emotional responses. Under Panksepp's framework, the transition from acute distress to relief in the presence of a specific individual is exactly the neurological condition that produces strong social attachment in mammals. The brain doesn't know the individual providing relief is a human rather than a conspecific. It knows that this specific entity was present at the transition from pain to safety, and it encodes that entity accordingly. The attachment isn't gratitude in the human philosophical sense. It's something more biological and possibly more durable. A specific individual associated with the most salient positive transition the animal's nervous system has recently experienced. This is why it keeps happening across species that have nothing obvious in common. A humpback whale that spent 40 minutes maneuvering a diver away from a tiger shark off the Cook Islands. Documented. A wild crow in Seattle that began leaving small objects, buttons, a screw, a piece of glass, at the feeding station of a specific family after the family's young daughter began feeding it regularly. A behavior that has continued for years and that crow researchers including John Marsluff at the University of Washington have studied extensively. A sea turtle in Costa Rica that returns annually to the beach of the man who rescued it from a fishing net decades ago, documented by biologist Gilberto Shedden across more than 20 years of recorded returns. Each of these cases involves an animal doing something that its standard behavioral repertoire doesn't account for. Not learned association in the simple sense. Not conditioned response to food reward. Something that looks, from the outside, like the animal has stored a specific experience, retained it across time, and is acting on it in a context where no immediate reward is available. Subscribing to this channel takes 2 seconds. It's free, and it's the only way to make sure you don't miss what comes next. The skeptical response to all of this is worth taking seriously, because it's not entirely wrong. We are, as a species, extraordinarily prone to anthropomorphizing animal behavior. We see a crow leaving objects and we interpret it as gift-giving because gift-giving is a human behavior we understand. We see an elephant approaching a specific researcher and we interpret it as recognition and gratitude because that's the framework our social brains reach for automatically. The animal may be doing something considerably more mechanistic that we're overlaying with human narrative. This is a genuine methodological problem in animal cognition research. John Marsluff, who has spent years studying crow intelligence, is careful about it. He documents behavior precisely and resists interpretive frameworks that exceed what the evidence directly supports. But here's what the evidence does directly support, without requiring any anthropomorphic interpretation at all. Some animals across multiple species demonstrate specific individual recognition of humans across extended time periods. Some animals modify their behavior towards specific humans in ways that track the history of their interactions with those specific humans. Some animals approach specific humans in contexts where no immediate reward is present and where approach behavior carries a cost in terms of exposure and vulnerability. Whatever is happening inside those animals, the behavior is real. The individual recognition is real. The temporal persistence of whatever is driving that recognition is real. Whether we call it gratitude or memory or attachment or something that doesn't have a human name yet, the animal came back. 11 months later. Different location, same man. Something brought it back. And the most honest thing science can currently say about what that something is. It's more than we thought. More structured, more specific, more persistent than the framework we built for understanding animal minds was designed to accommodate. The framework is being rebuilt. The elephant didn't wait for that to happen.